I'm Lori Gruen. I'm a white presenting woman with long gray and brown hair, and I'm wearing purple glasses and a purple scarf. And I'm sitting in a room with two bird posters and a futon couch behind me with a bit of a square quilted little throw on it. And I'm coming to you from Connecticut. And I want to thank Dr. Wolf and Dr. Tremaine for inviting me to chair this session and for the great work they've done to put together this crucially important conference that follows on another crucially important conference that they ran last year. I use she, her pronouns, but I'm fine with they, them. And my work is in animal studies and animal ethics and politics, feminist philosophy and ecofeminist theory and practice, as well as political philosophy. And I've started doing work as well in disability studies, and I also do work in carceral studies. I'm really happy to be here to moderate this session on whose health, speciesism, ableism, and vegan ethics that will be presented by Stephanie Jenkins. Stephanie Jenkins is an associate professor of philosophy at Oregon State University. She's the co-founder and former co-director of the Phronesis Lab for Engaged Ethics, as well as the current director of the Oregon State University Disability Network. She works in feminist philosophy, disability studies, critical animal studies, and ethics, and she's the co-editor of a really important book that came out last year, Disability and Animality, Perspectives in Critical Animal Studies. Before Stephanie gets going, I just want to mention that if you have questions for Stephanie, please put them in the Q&A, and we will have time at the end to go over some questions and hopefully have a discussion. If you have just general thoughts, those are good for the chat. Okay, take it away, Stephanie.
Okay, before I get started, I want to make sure that I get my PowerPoint started up. I guess first I need to share my screen. And start my timer. Okay, the PowerPoint just has a few pictures on it and some block quotations so that you can follow along. The title slide is Entangled Subjectivity, and so I wanted to first thank Dr. Gruen and Dr. Tremaine for their work in bringing me here today, and also apologize to Dr. Gruen for not giving her the heads up that I actually changed my title for today. I notified Dr. Tremaine, but forgot to include Dr. Gruen on this as well. I'll give you some explanation as to how that came about with my talk. The slide says that my name is Stephanie Jenkins, that I'm at Oregon State University, and it also includes my email, stephanie.jenkins@oregonstate.edu, if you have any questions. I am a white woman who uses she, her pronouns with shoulder length dark hair. I'm wearing reading glasses because, well, I just reached that age where I need them. I'm wearing blue and white floral dress shirt with short sleeves. If at some point I talk with my hands, you'll see that I have red nail polish. I'm presenting in front of a Zoom background that depicts a sandy beach. It's low tide, and the sky is full of white, fluffy clouds. There is a yellow lab standing in the left corner looking out into the sea. The title of my paper, which is a work in progress, is Entangled Subjectivity on Care and Service Dogs. The original title, Whose Health, Speciesism, Ableism, and Vegan Ethics, is the one that I originally submitted because, to be honest, I was afraid to submit this paper, the one that I've been working on. But when I came across a bag of, please excuse me, dog poop that someone left on a trail on my daily walk, and instead of getting mad at the irresponsible dog owner, I cried because of how much I wished I could pick up my dog's poop. I realized the difficulty I was feeling was precisely the point. Grief is the starting point of this presentation because it undoes the subject. It had undone me, or more to the point, it had undone us. Who is us? In 2013, I began training and working with a service dog, a rescued lab mix named Mandy, of unknown age and origin. The first slide, the first picture of the first slide on the left shows Mandy, a yellow lab mix, approximately 3 to 5 years old, and about 60 pounds, on a dog bed in a kennel the day that I adopted her. She's holding a green frog dog toy in her mouth. Over time, she learned and performed several tasks related to my chronic pain and endocrine conditions, and I depended on her for my health and safety. The second picture on the right shows us working together several years later in 2015 at the American Philosophical Association conference in Atlanta. She's gained 10 pounds and is standing next to me, seated in a rented scooter, so that I did not have to put mine on an airplane. We are in the conference hotel lobby, and I'm wearing a black dress with a dark pink spotted pattern. Her status as a service animal meant she navigated spaces and had experiences from which most dogs are excluded. She traveled domestically and internationally by plane, went to academic conferences, attended my philosophy classes and office hours on campus, visited but did not dine in public restaurants, and even attended rock concerts, wearing her professional grade earmuff protection mutt muffs, of course. So on the left, and on this slide, you see Mandy wearing her mutt muffs, lying and standing alert, looking alert while working at a concert in Eugene, Oregon. It's dark because the band is playing, but it's lit by colorful shapes of the house lights. On the right, you see her seated and facing the camera, wearing her mutt muffs during a set break at a Phish concert in Atlanta, Georgia. We are in the ADA section, and the railing that separates us from the general floor admission are visible behind us. When she was off duty, we played fetch, visited beaches, snuggled, and watched Netflix. You know, the things that friends do, with an essential difference. We traveled as a collective, and I always carried a doctor's note and a lawyer's business card just in case I needed to enforce our right to remain together as a team. That partnership carried not only legal rights, but also ethical, epistemological, and ontological consequences. Our subjectivities were entangled. We were not one, but two, a duo of misfits navigating a speciesist and ableist world that is not built for either one of us, let alone the CRIP human-animal hybrid that we and other service dog teams embodied. In this paper, I will review the essential disability studies literature critiquing the legal definition of service dogs, identify and evaluate the alternative care and proximity ethics within this literature, and propose my own understanding of entangled subjectivity as a contribution to these discussions. The first section of my paper is what is a service animal or dog? Much of the disability studies literature on service animals addresses their legal, ethical, and ontological status. What is a service animal? What tasks do they perform, and how does this impact the experience of disability? In the United States, under the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act and the 2019 amendment, a service animal is defined as a dog or miniature horse trained to perform a task to assist a person with disability. The Department of Justice offers the following guidance. Service animals are defined as dogs that are individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. Examples of such work or tasks are guiding people who are blind, alerting people who are deaf, pulling a wheelchair, alerting and protecting a person who is having a seizure, reminding a person with a mental illness to take prescribed medications, calming a person with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, during an anxiety attack, or performing other duties. Service animals are working animals, not pets. The work or a task a dog has been trained to provide must be directly related to the person's disability. Dogs whose sole function is to provide comfort or emotional support do not qualify as service animals under the ADA. Categorization as a service animal permits access to public spaces, including those of government, business, and nonprofit organizations, from which non-human animals would normally be excluded. In other words, the animal's presence is considered a reasonable accommodation for the person with disability. In the same way that a restaurant must permit and make space for a wheelchair or scooter at the table or restroom, it must do so for a service animal team. Two significant essays in the disability studies literature stand out regarding their efforts to think through the implications of this legal definition. Kelly Oliver's Service Dogs, Between Animal Studies and Disability Studies, and Margaret Price's What is a Service Animal? A Careful Rethinking. Both scholars begin their arguments with close readings of legal documents to demonstrate that a function-focused definition of service animals that distinguishes them from pets and emotional support animals, A, reduces them to equipment, and B, produces what Price calls, citing Ellen Samuels, a biocertification process of policing a sharp boundary between legitimate and illegitimate service animals. Price digs a bit deeper to examine professional training organization materials, service dog community publications, and news articles dedicated to identifying fake service dogs. The essential difference between a real and fake service dog, according to Price's reading of these documents, is behavior. A dog must perform work or tasks directly related to the handler's disability, and this is the point. It must be trainable. Therefore, providing comfort, companionship, or emotional support do not qualify as a service animal task because they are natural behaviors and are not trained on unique cues. In fact, dogs whose sole function is to provide comfort or emotional support are explicitly excluded as service animals under the ADA definition. It is here, the excluded affective ties, where Oliver and Price concentrate their criticism of the function-focused definition of service animals. The caring, intimate connection between a service dog and handler defy attempts to ontologically reduce service animals to equipment, or as Price names it, citing Karen Barad, thingification. Moreover, highlighting the significance of the extra legal companionship that these authors and anyone who has ever worked with a service animal will attest to, loosens the division between real and fake service animals, pointing towards a more complex relational definition. Oliver focuses on the ambiguous status of service animals, despite their legal qualification as property. Laws can't prevent people from becoming emotionally attached to their service animals, she writes. The emotional interdependence and companionship that characterize the service animal partnership, she argues, exemplifies the essence of emotional and physical support from others for a human existence. The failure to recognize this fundamental vulnerability is what she calls the disavowal of dependence. While Oliver's essay uses service animals as a special case to springboard into animal ethics more generally, Price's article focuses on the ontology of service dogs, offering a phenomenological and ethical account of her experience working with a service dog who others may view as illegitimate. She examines a number of examples to explore the boundary between a legitimate, trainable service task and comfort. At what point does providing support or comfort become a task, she asks? For example, A dog can perform an entertaining trick that cheers up a depressed person on cue. Is it a service task? So I just showed you a very brief clip of Mandy wearing an orange vest, running up a staircase to slide down a water slide. Right? It cheers me up every time, but does it count as a service task? Right? This is precisely the point that Price is trying to make. For Price, the point of troubling the sharp distinction between comfort and task is to recognize the subtler, more nuanced relation between handlers and their service animals than legal or public definitions would allow. The caring relationships between service animals and their human partners, as reflected in lived experience, are more nuanced and intimate and complex. This demonstrated in her description of traumatic incident on an airplane when she was without her service dog, Ivy. When her partner arrived at the airport, Price writes, "I am not in need of my service animal specifically. I just need anyone, preferably everyone in my family." Here, Ivy, rather than performing a trained task, is providing the loving support of a family member or close friend. Other first-person accounts describing service dog teams in disability studies literature support the relational accounts found in Price and Oliver. In Beasts of Burden, Sonora Taylor emphasizes the way her service dog, Bailey, defies the legal and professional requirements. His size is impractical for her needed tasks. She did not follow the training guidelines or even read the training book she ordered. And like most shelter dogs, Bailey had significant trauma that interfered with his training and ability to trust. Yet he provided an important social function, what Taylor calls mediating the outside world. Instead of Taylor being the focus of ableist curiosity, stares, and privacy violations, Bailey became the center of attention. He is also able to read Baylor's and her partner's emotions. She is just able to do just the same for him. Bailey, she writes, is attentive to my emotions, needs, and whereabouts. His very presence helping to mediate between me and ableism I encounter when we go on our daily walks. In Working Residence, Emily Michael identifies the reason why care defines the service animal relationship. Dogs will not work for handlers they do not trust. York, she writes, describing her service dog, works with me because he's smart and dedicated, and we have learned to work together. He's not a pre-ordered, pre-packaged machine that obeys every command. Rather, she describes him as a best friend, partner, and companion. For all four authors, the extent to which we value their caring relations matter not just for how we conceptualize service animals, but also ethical political theory more generally. Service animals function as a special case at the intersections of animals and disability, at the borders of the moral community. For Oliver, dependence and interdependence exist on a continuum. Service animals make evident the ways in which all human beings are dependent on animals in virtually every facet of life. Citing Eva Feder-Kate, she argues that that if our dependence on other human beings generates moral obligations to them, then we also share similar obligations to non-human animals. Price cites Oliver directly in order to move towards a collective care ethics so that the complex caring relationships between service animals and their human companions dissolve the bright lines between human, disability, need, animal, task. The overarching thesis and substantial contribution of Taylor's Beasts of Burden, of course, is that ableism and speciesism are co-constitutive. Her account of Bailey troubles the dominance of both narratives and positions him as an ethical subject. Finally, Michaels concludes Working Residence with the dream that the misfit of the service animal team can be leveraged to transform social space on a larger scale, that we can make room for non-human animals in our daily lives. The next section is alternative ethics. What is this alternative ethic that service animals makes accessible? Oliver and Price, via Oliver, cite Cindy Willett's interspecies ethics that advocates for an ethics of proximity. based on cohabitation, love, and interdependence. In order to demonstrate how my argument departs, I'll now take a brief look at Willett's argument. In disability studies, we argue that the definitions of the human that rely on species-typical norms or ableist performance criteria are not static, objective scientific objects, but scientific fictions in constant iteration or revision. In interspecies ethics, Willett adds Western moral philosophy to the list of discourses narrating human superiority and exceptionalism. She identifies two salient features of canonical moral theory. First, the primacy of the atomic individual, and second, a hidden moral cartography. Modern moral theory, she writes, foregrounds the autonomous individual who is expected to take ownership over her own well-being by exercising a capacity to make rational choices based on principles of fairness. When the atomic individual functions as the protagonist of moral theory, interdependence, social ties, and affect, retreat backstage and play at most a supporting role for corporate selfhood. Second, Willett unmasks what Michael Sandel calls a philosophical anthropology, or a conception of the human person that is implicit within moral philosophy. She challenges how debates about moral considerability have regulated non-human animals to passive participation as moral patients, constitutive outsides, or props in human pursuits of meaning, agency, and community. In doing so, Willett project echoes Judith Butler's account of frames of moral recognizability. Interspecies ethics asks us to consider who counts as a who beyond the hierarchization of species typical capacities and the normalization of what Butler terms the tacit interpretive scheme that marks some lives as agreeable and other lives as unlivable. Willett offers reciprocal care, effective attunement, and radical interdependence as antidotes to grand narratives of autonomous normate, atomic individual as the hero of moral theory. Willett's project, which she describes as a speculative venture in social and political ethics, reanimates the human within a nuanced, layered ethics of interspecies engagement. The next section is service dogs as entangled subjectivity. While I admire and have found creative and scholarly inspiration in the relational accounts of service animals, I don't think they go quite far enough ethically or ontologically. The moral map that Willett has laid out for us needs stronger tools. Price, Oliver, Taylor, and Michael all define service dogs in terms of intimate, caring relationships and advocate some form of ethics of proximity. Rather than thinking about a service animal as one whole of a two-part relationship, I would like the emphasis to be on the relationship itself, the team. That is to say, my experience of working with a service dog was one of a dual, co-authored subjectivity. I experienced the world as a we, a plurality, rather than as a single individual plus a dog. It's important to note that I don't think the authors would necessarily disagree with this shift. In fact, Price gestured towards it in her essay when she cites Rod Michalow's The Two-in-One, in which the relationship between the leader and the follower is fluid, characterized by a process of becoming. But I would at least like to argue for a perspective shift and think that what the implications of that difference would make. I call this CRIP, human-animal hybrid entangled subjectivity, inspired by Laurie Gruen's concept of entangled empathy. It follows in the lineage of feminist philosophy's exploration of pregnant embodiment, Alice Drager's challenge to the primacy of singletons in One of Us, and Donna Haraway's Cyborg. My service dog team hybrid subjectivity was true phenomenologically. We were inseparable, we lived, worked, played, traveled, and slept together. When friends or colleagues asked, "How are you?" I would respond, "Our day is going well," or "We had a stressful morning." Medically, we shared an endocrine condition and took one of the same replacement hormones, but I am allergic to one of her pain medications. This needed to be accounted for when handling. The first time a veterinarian asked me if I wanted to pre-authorize CPR or sign a DNR, I realized I was making health decisions for us both. Biologically, as Donna Haraway noted about her research dog, living and breathing together meant Mandy's cells had colonized my own. We were constitutively companion species. Bodily, we shared embodied habits like sense of space and comportment. Our biorhythms for waking, resting, and going to the bathroom were synced. Even my sense of safety was tied to her presence. I can ignore my phone alarm to take my medication, but not her nose. She let me know if someone was at the door. This list is not exhaustive, but I will leave it here for now. The extent of this entangled subjectivity was revealed to me in its absence. Mandy very quickly and suddenly declined in April. She was an older lab, and as a teacher of existentialism, I'm all too familiar with the finitude of existence. So I was conceptually aware of and even practically prepared for her passing. I've been an animal lover my entire life. I've lost many animal friends before, and nothing prepared me or even compared to the loss that I can only describe as having pieces of my physical body ripped out. Alternatively, I'm a drummer, and the musicians in the Zoom room might appreciate this metaphor. I was like a hi-hat that was missing a top cymbal. I made no noise when the pedal was pushed. As I relearned my embodied habits, as I relearned to be a subject, I designed a new safety plan, readjusted my biorhythms, and ever so slowly got more used to living in the world alone. I came to the realization that I had, in the 8 years that I learned to work, live, and play with Mandy, become a we. If, as Willett asks, we are reimagining and refashioning philosophical tools and building upon the authors above, and if we use entangled subjectivity as a new model, what are we looking at? A service dog team whose beings have been co-shaped at every level, a duo, a 2-in-1? In my reading of Willett, the linchpin for the attack against individualist moral theories is rupturing the fortress of the atomic individual. While she does not make this argument, I think it is implied, and she would agree that the atomic subject is also what Rosemary Garland Thompson calls the norming. In other words, the moral subject is assumed to be of able body and mind. And of course, the subject is decidedly singular and human. As Ed Cohen notes in A Body Worth Defending, the formula is one body, one mind per subject. If, borrowing a phrase from Foucault, somatic singularity is established, individuals can be ranked, ordered, and classified through systems of oppression such as ableism and speciesism. It is through these categorizations that the moral cartography that Willett and Butler describe are established. Entangled subjectivity offers a glimpse of what it might mean to move beyond an individualist framework. The interactive dual subject of the CRIP team of the dog plus the dog animal duo throws a wrench in the machine of the atomic individual and resists easy placement on a moral hierarchy or chain of being. Ableism was deflated a little bit every time I realized that a stranger's at first seemingly invasive questions about Mandy were because they wanted to know if they qualified for a service dog too. And we ended up sharing a surprise CRIP connection on the street or at the airport. Speciesism struggles to make sense of the friends who pull me aside and whisper that it was harder to lose their dog than their mother, their uncle, or other relative when they realize that the white powder I'm spreading is my service dog's ashes. So what if the subject of ethics was a CRIP human-animal duo of misfits? Would we conceptualize rights differently? Praise different virtues, blame different vices? Would we have virtues, vices, rights, and theories at all? Would care work or trainable tasks simply be understood as things you do for your loved ones? would social and physical spaces be more accessible? While I don't yet have answers to these particular questions, I'm grateful to the disability studies and animal studies scholars, and of course Mandy, who have prompted me to ask them. The asking itself is a problematization of its own importance. However, in this paper, my goal has been to outline some of the specific literature on service dogs and animals, identify care and proximity ethics literature within this dialogue, and to shift the kaleidoscopic lens on this literature to propose entangled subjectivity as a way of thinking about service dogs that more accurately describes my experience of working, living, breathing, playing with a service dog, and that I also think has the potential to counter the hegemony of the atomic individual. And that, by my count, is almost exactly time. So I think I will stop there, and I'm really looking forward to your questions and feedback.
Thank you so much. That was so powerful. And I'm really, really sorry that Mandy passed, and I want to commend you on your bravery for being able to speak about it so compassionately and forcefully in such a short time period. I think there are some questions. I wanted to start, if I could take the prerogative to start on my own question and make one quick suggestion following on the last session too, and thinking about the ways in which these structures and these laws end up shaping a certain kind of discursive space. And so I wanted to ask a question about service animal and the use of the notion of service animal. I mean, that's the term that gets used, but I'm sure you've thought a lot about its use and the way in which service is meant to sort of modify, quote unquote, animal, and the way in which that in some sense could be a diminishment or a distortion of both the dogs and mini horses or whoever and the relationship. So that's the first question. The second thought I had, I just want to very quickly raise it. I don't know if you're familiar with Harlan Weaver's work, Becoming in Kind, but it seems really an important way of thinking about this entangled subjectivity that you're also talking about. What Harlan does is, as he was transitioning, a trans-masked person, as he was transitioning, he also had his dog who was a pit bull, and the two of them together navigated dangerous space. And I thought that might be a really useful reference as well.
Thank you so much for that. It's funny that you brought up the question of service, because I was thinking about this and actually cut that section out of the paper for time, and also because it was something that I'm still thinking through exactly how I want to handle it. But I agree with you entirely that I think that the use of the term service is problematic because it first of all diminishes the relationship. It characterizes it the relationship of between right. For now, I'm going to speak about service animals in terms of dog in that subcategory, right, between human and dog as one of labor, and that I think creates some misunderstandings a lot in the literature. So for example, in the animal ethics literature, there are some in critical animal studies, McPherson argues that the service animal relationship is one of slave labor, right? Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of what that relationship is, because as Michael argues, a dog will not work for someone with whom the dog does not trust, right? It's a loving relationship. It is not one of labor. But also, if you if you think about it in terms of service, if you think about it in terms of labor, it becomes one in which there's an on duty and an off duty, which I think is in some ways problematic. And also, there becomes a kind of a difficulty in terms of when the relationship ends. So as Mandy got older, and I had to start thinking about what retirement looked like. there would be times when I would say, okay, Mandy's retired. Oh no, she's not. Mandy's retired. Oh no, she's not. And it's because she never stopped working, right? It was part of who she was, that she wanted to take care of me, right? And it actually was harmful to her to leave her at home when I went to work. And so one of the really interesting ethical issues that came up was that my ADA pass, right, so that I could park in an accessible parking pass that was issued to me when I was sort of feeling like I was able to walk and that I didn't necessarily need to use the pass, but that Mandy was actually the one who needed some assistance. There was this ethical question of, can I use the parking pass or not? And what my medical provider said to me is, Stephanie, that pass was issued to you as a team, not just to you as an individual, right? So if Mandy needs it, right, you can use it as well, right? And so if we only think about the relationship in terms of service, it means that the relationship gets reduced to labor, but also that we think about the individuals separately rather than as an inseparable team. And then that last part is something that comes up in both Taylor's work and Price's work in terms of service dogs who are working that also have disabilities, right? So I guess there's a whole lot that I have to say about this. I guess the last thing that I'll add is that one of the things that I was thinking about is that maybe a better model might be to think about it in terms of play. I have some experience with animal training, and I was also been in conversations with a friend who is a professional dog trainer. And the conversation that we've been having is that all good training revolves around play, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's fun, right? But it's based on positive rewards. And so, right, if we think about the relationship in terms of service and work, that it kind of loses that aspect. And so I have not thought about Weaver in relationship to this project, and I really appreciate that reference. So this is something that's, as I mentioned, a work in progress, so I will definitely go back to that.
That sounds great. Okay, we have another question, and this is a question from Mitch Curia. And they say, thank you very much for the presentation. What do you think about the idea of referring to ourselves as dog caretakers, parents, companions, etc., rather than owners? Similarly, what do you think about changing laws and policies to recognize dog caretakers as legal guardians rather than owners?
That's a great question. Thank you. So the first part, I entirely agree with. I don't. When I think of my animal companions, I think of myself as a caretaker, right? I often, when I would speak of Mandy, I often described her as my sister, right? I wasn't her owner. If anything, she had me wrapped around her finger. But the question of laws is what had me paused. To recognize dog caretakers as legal guardians rather than owners. I mean, I would love to do that. My only hesitation, I suppose, is one of practicality, and perhaps that is a failure of imagination on my part. Is there something that you would like to follow up on that?
Well, I might be able to speak a little bit about this particular issue, and I don't know if this is what was in their mind, but I think part of my question about the service notion, the notion of thinking of them as service animals, and sort of going along with a particular conception that's represented in law and policy of what animals are as service beings or as property that you own. Maybe the idea here is that if there's a way of changing law and policy, that might help in changing attitudes towards these animals. I'm just putting words into their mouth, but it's I think an ongoing question and an important one. There's another question from Andrea Pitts, and they ask, they say, thank you for this incredibly compelling and important work. My question is not directly about service animals and their entangled relations with humans, but rather police dogs and other animals used in carceral and colonial apparatus. I recently came across Benedict Boisseron's book, Afro Dog, Blackness and the Animal Question, which is a really great book. That's my aside, sorry. And it addresses some of the complicated interconnections between Black studies and animal studies. In this sense, could we utilize entangled subjectivity as a method through which to understand the ways in which human animal couplings and assemblages can be used to further systems of ableism, colonialism, and racism? Many thanks for this fantastic research.
With regards to Ken, I think the answer is yes, absolutely, and that this is the aspect of the project that I need to think more deeply on. It comes out in Price's article. There's a section in which she thinks through some of the kind of the racial history of dogs. Oliver talks about the uses of dogs in the military a bit, and actually the first thing that really comes to mind is Shannon Sullivan has a reference in her work on whiteness about there was a kind of a racist dog in terms of how it responded to people in public, and so this is this particular book is not one that I'm familiar with, so I really appreciate the reference, and I think that I will have to dive more deeply into it. Let me just. But entangled subjectivity, right? It's a tool that can have, right? If we think about it as a technique of self, it can have kind of aspects of freedom, but it also can be used as a tool of oppression, and it's something that we need to think about carefully as a result.
I just wanted to say that, picking up on that last point, I just wanted to say that Lori Gruen, you discussed this in your or you make points about this or surrounding this idea in your interview that you did with me for Dialogues on Disability. And you mentioned SIL and AFCO. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
I did want to, there's SIL and AFCO have a really important book. I was going to raise this called Afroism, which is a really interesting book, but also in this same general area to think about the different ways of thinking about sort of not necessarily carceral human animal entanglements, which is, I think, what part of what Dr. Pitts was raising, but in terms of sort of the complexity of race and animality. Claire Jean Kim's book, Dangerous Crossings, is really an important examination. I know that Dr. Jenkins is fully aware of that book, but there are a number of people in animal studies who are increasingly writing about issues of race and colonization and the relationships of animals. So there's a lot, I think, that could be said there. Do you want to say anything more, Stephanie?
No, I really appreciate the feedback. As I mentioned, that this is a project in its very early stages, so getting pushed in the right direction is something that I value.
Oh, Mitch has a follow. Mitch came back and followed up, and to go back to this question, this is the original question about guardianship, and thinking about guardianship. If dog parents were legal guardians, we could retain joint custody in cases of divorce. The law would ban landlords from evicting or denying housing to dog guardians. We could potentially access financial resources and medical health care for our dogs, children, etc. And so it would change the status of the animal I'm speaking now, from the status as property to some other legal status, more akin to having a parent and a child.
Those are all things that I am fully on board with.
Great. Other questions? I think we have 1 minute. Is that true, Shelley? Well, I'm just going to take a moment and say two things. One is, I think that there is just such exciting work to be done in the area of disability, race, colonialism, and animality. And I'm just so grateful that Stephanie's doing this important work. And I also just want to thank you again for doing it with a very sort of embodied, engaged, and direct way. I think we need much more work in animal studies that centers the animal, that focuses on the animals. It's not just about animals, but is about the relationships that we're in with animals. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, thank you for a great talk, Stephanie. And thank you very much for moderating or for chairing this session, Lori. You've done a great job.